Okay, folks, it's time to pull the trigger and transform yourself because my course, Broadcast Yourself, is now open. In 8 weeks, I'm going to personally mentor you and show you how to start your own podcast and how to turn it into a business. I've done this with thousands of students, and you've watched my entire journey at London Reel for the last 7 years. We've now touched 100 million people from around the world and turned this into an 8-figure business. I'm going to show you how to do it with my 8-week online accountability course. There is nothing like this out there. And if you really want to have 8 episodes up on iTunes of your very own podcast, learn how to connect with influencers, start JV partnerships, click on the link, pull the trigger, and join me. I promise you, it will change your life forever. It changed my life. I connected with people that I used to dream about. Now they're my friends. I've got a business around it, and every day I get to live my passion. Cool people come to my studio, and I get to hang out with them and learn from them. And honestly, my life will never be the same again, and I will never stop podcasting until the day I die, because it's really changed my life that much. So click on the link. This is only going to be open for a few days. This course always sells out, but I'm going to have a group of 100 people from around the world that are going to join us on this adventure. 8 weeks, you're going to have 8 episodes on iTunes. I promise that. I guarantee that, or you can have your money back. So click on the link. Let's do this adventure. It's going to be hella fun, and it's going to change your life. I'll see you on the inside.
If you can't control your own brain and your brain controls you, you're fucked. You got to tell your brain where you want to go and how you want to go and how you want to get there. What is in us, we have no idea until we start trying hard.
What defines the strongest man in history? And they'll all say the deadlift. Who can pick up the most weight from the floor to his hips? And that man's me. With the power of belief, achieve amazing things and prove to millions and millions of people that no matter where you come from, what you do, hard work and dedication can get you places.
Success is an empty thing. It will leave you empty. It's a filthy word. It's a nauseating word. In the end of the day, it's about being a craftsman and not being the success story. Sit down and do your fucking work.
Hey you, yes you. You're the one that has been stalking me all over the internet. You've been watching my ads, you've been going to my webinars, you've been reading my emails, and yet you haven't pulled the trigger. You haven't decided to join my Business Accelerator and be with me and a small group of people for the next 8 weeks and absolutely transform your life. I'm talking about, I'm going to get you vlogging to camera. I'm going to get you up the curve of social media. I'm going to get you looking at your market opportunity map and figure out how to take that passion and turn it to a business. But we're not done. Then I'm going to teach you how to turn it into a digital product. Then I'm going to show you how to do your own live webinar, and I'm going to show you how you can make money. This is a blueprint that's going to take you from nothing to a revenue generating business. That's exactly what we do. We've graduated over 5,000 students from 107 countries in the world, and we're crushing it here. We show people how to create these revenue generating businesses. And again, this blueprint works however you want to scale. It can be for 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 plus in revenues. And that's what we do on the inside. So what is stopping you, you know? And I know you've got a lot of fears out there. Everyone has fears. Oh, I don't know if I spend money online, maybe it's not the right thing to do. Look, I've been here for 9 years. You know, I've been teaching this Business Accelerator course for over 5 years, and we are getting amazing results. Our accountability system is second to none. I'm going to be with you live every single week. I've got team leaders. We've got an accountability doc. We've got everything to make you go into your fears. And that's what this is. This is a fear. But I also want to tell you this. If you do not pull the trigger now, and I'm closing this course out, this is the closest you're ever going to be to building this business. I know it, because from here on out, you just get further and further away from ever having a mentor that's gonna drag you kicking and screaming to your goal in real time. It's just not gonna happen out there. So what you need to do is this. You need to take a deep breath. You need to pull the trigger, pull out that plastic and bang those numbers in there and trust the process. Trust me, trust London Real, because we have the track record and we are going to get you those results more so than you're ever going to get on your own. And let me ask you a question. What should you do? Should you read another book or listen to another podcast or watch another video on how to start a business? Or should you get with someone that has a proven record, that has built a business of London Real right in front of your own eyes, that has taught over 5,000 students and is there with you live for 8 weeks? You know the answer to that question, and if you pull the trigger, I promise you, you will not regret this decision, and we're gonna build you an incredible business. So like I said, pull out that plastic, bang in those digits. I'm gonna see you on the first live call very, very shortly, and I look forward to getting you that incredible business that's gonna change your life. It's gonna change everything. Could change your location, your personal relationships, your impact on the world. This whole thing changed my life, and I want it to change yours. So pull the trigger, and I will see you on the inside.
Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. Nobody changes until they change their energy. The moment you start feeling whole in gratitude, your healing begins.
We are actually born to be great, to feel great. If you learn to control the breath, the life force itself. I am showing this all through science, through this simple breathing technique. 30 breaths, fully in and letting go. You learn to be the alchemist of your own body and your own mind. You are born to be more than the normal standard, to be super, man.
Peace, love, enjoy, relax. That's what it's all about, and that's why we're here.
I am super excited to start with our brand new URL, and that is freedomplatform.tv. Go there right now, and I'll be sharing screenshots throughout this broadcast here. This is our brand new dedicated URL, dedicated website, where all of our censored content will be located now and into eternity. This is all the episodes with David Icke. These are our conversations with Dr. Rashid Buttar, both of them. Both of our conversations with Dr. Judy Mikovits, our conversations with Dr. Kaufman, with Robert Kennedy. Everything that was banned on other channels and major technology platforms is all in one central place, freedomplatform.tv. Go check it out right now and share it. Again, that's our dedicated website and our dedicated URL. Now we have a permanent home for everything, and it's not just the interviews, it's also any other content that has been banned. We will be uploading there as well, including Dr. Judy Mikovits. She had a presentation that was literally stripped from her own website. So that's on the platform as well as the individual video clips that you can download from the various episodes and upload to any of your social media platforms. So again, go there right now. It's freedomplatform.tv. And you can see everything that we've got up there. Again, this is all the uncensored content, the downloadable content, the clips, the presentations, and it's the start of what we are building here at the Digital Freedom Platform. Again, this is just the beginning, but I wanted to show you this because the team has been working super hard on this. Again, this is exactly what we were talking about a few weeks ago when we decided to launch the fundraising campaign for the Digital Freedom Platform, and finally wanted to show this to you. Of course, we built this just like we said we would, but we've got much more to do. And as I said on the last broadcast, we are not here to take part, we are here to take over.
Fame definitely got some negatives that I feel like people don't consider.
like the lack of privacy.
So money doesn't buy happiness.
Oh, fuck no. Chasing money and girls is not what makes you happy. I think happiness comes more from having good friendships and doing things with your friends.
The significance of being human is just this. For all other creatures, evolution, how they evolve is fixed by nature. For the human being, your evolution is in your hands. If you strive, you can evolve whichever way you want.
We're in a dark age. We've lost our compass. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we want to go. What is to be done?
It's going to take some consciousness change to get us out of the box we're in.
La maldición de ayahuasca, nosotros podemos conectar con esa persona y le da cuenta dónde está la raíz del problema de él. Pues ahí se trabaja.
Sometimes I feel anxious and unappreciative of the things I have.
There's no such thing as work-life balance. There are work-life choices and you make them and they have consequences.
What we don't understand about psychedelics is a very thick book. They can help you orient yourself morally, but look the hell out.
You don't always get what you want with ayahuasca, but you always get what you need.
The diseases of individual are the diseases of the world. Our culture, soul, is severely wounded.
Humanitarian crisis growing by the day.
And feminism needs men who have the courage to stand by the women in their lives and the women in society. And not too many men have that, but it's amazing when you see men who actually do that.
People need to be more brave in their own lives, at work. I'm here to live and tell the tale that you can fight the machine and still survive.
Would you like to start your own business, but just don't know how to get started? Well, I have good news, because I've just launched a free service for new entrepreneurs. It's a consultation call with a member of my team to discuss your ideas and give you a step-by-step program to make your business a reality. I know that starting your own business can be a huge challenge, but with the right strategy and mentorship, your dream is just one step away. But these spots are limited, so click on the link below to book your call now.
War is a nightmare. War is hell. But war is also an incredible teacher.
You can forget that there's evil people out there. You need to be reminded of that. The thing that reveals human nature is when human beings are put in traumatic scenarios.
Take ownership. Take extreme ownership.
If your team isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's your fault. The will to fight is the will to kill, and it's the will to die. And those are some pretty big wills that you need to have. There's no one that wishes for peace more than people that have been to war. When the war drums sound, it's my friends that are going to fight. People are going to die on both sides, and yeah, that's why they say war is hell. It's not one battle. It's a campaign. Win the campaign and win the war.
Okay, folks, it's time to pull the trigger and transform yourself because my course, Broadcast Yourself, is now open. In 8 weeks, I'm going to personally mentor you and show you how to start your own podcast and how to turn it into a business. I've done this with thousands of students, and you've watched my entire journey at London Real for the last 7 years. We've now touched 100 million people from around the world and turned this into an 8-figure business. I'm going to show you how to do it with my 8-week online accountability course. There is nothing like this out there. And if you really want to have 8 episodes up on iTunes of your very own podcast, learn how to connect with influencers, start JV partnerships, click on the link, pull the trigger, and join me. I promise you, it will change your life forever. It changed my life. I connected with people that I used to dream about. Now they're my friends. I've got a business around it, and every day I get to live my passion. Cool people come to my studio, and I get to hang out with them and learn from them. And honestly, my life will never be the same again, and I will never stop podcasting until the day I die, because it's really changed my life that much. So click on the link. This is only going to be open for a few days. This course always sells out, but I'm going to have a group of 100 people from around the world that are going to join us on this adventure. 8 weeks, you're going to have 8 episodes on iTunes. I promise that. I guarantee that, or you can have your money back. So click on the link. Let's do this adventure. It's going to be hella fun, and it's going to change your life. I'll see you on the inside.
If you can't control your own brain and your brain controls you, you're fucked. You got to tell your brain where you want to go and how you want to go and how you want to get there. What is in us, we have no idea until we start trying hard.
What defines the strongest man in history? And they'll all say the deadlift. Who can pick up the most weight from the floor to his hips? And that man's me. With the power of belief, achieve amazing things and prove to millions and millions of people that no matter where you come from, what you do, hard work and dedication can get you places.
Success is an empty thing. It will leave you empty. It's a filthy word. It's a nauseating word. In the end of the day, it's about being a craftsman and not being the success story. Sit down and do your fucking work.
Hey you, yes you. You're the one that has been stalking me all over the internet. You've been watching my ads, you've been going to my webinars, you've been reading my emails, and yet you haven't pulled the trigger. You haven't decided to join my business accelerator and be with me and a small group of people for the next 8 weeks and absolutely transform your life. I'm talking about, I'm gonna get you vlogging to camera. I'm gonna get you up the curve of social media. I'm gonna get you looking at your market opportunity map and figure out how to take that passion and turn it to a business. But we're not done. Then I'm going to teach you how to turn it into a digital product. Then I'm going to show you how to do your own live webinar, and I'm going to show you how you can make money. This is a blueprint that's going to take you from nothing to a revenue generating business. That's exactly what we do. We've graduated over 5,000 students from 107 countries in the world, and we're crushing it here. We show people how to create these revenue generating businesses. And again, this blueprint works however you want to scale. It can be for 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 plus in revenues. And that's what we do on the inside. So what is stopping you, you know? And I know you've got a lot of fears out there. Everyone has fears. Oh, I don't know if I spend money online, maybe it's not the right thing to do. Look, I've been here for 9 years. You know, I've been teaching this Business Accelerator course for over 5 years, and we are getting amazing results. Our accountability system is second to none. I'm going to be with you live every single week. I've got team leaders. We've got an accountability doc. We've got everything to make you go into your fears. And that's what this is. This is a fear. But I also want to tell you this. If you do not pull the trigger now, and I'm closing this course out, this is the closest you're ever going to be to building this business. I know it, because from here on out, you just get further and further away from ever having a mentor that's gonna drag you kicking and screaming to your goal in real time. It's just not gonna happen out there. So what you need to do is this. You need to take a deep breath. You need to pull the trigger, pull out that plastic and bang those numbers in there and trust the process. Trust me, trust London Real, because we have the track record and we are going to get you those results more so than you're ever going to get on your own. And let me ask you a question. What should you do? Should you read another book or listen to another podcast or watch another video on how to start a business? Or should you get with someone that has a proven record, that has built a business of London Real right in front of your own eyes, that has taught over 5,000 students and is there with you live for 8 weeks? You know the answer to that question, you know? And if you pull the trigger, I promise you, you will not regret this decision, and we're gonna build you an incredible business. So like I said, pull out that plastic, bang in those digits. I'm gonna see you on the first live call very, very shortly, and I look forward to getting you that incredible business that's gonna change your life. It's gonna change everything. Could change your location, your personal relationships, your impact on the world. This whole thing changed my life, and I want it to change yours. So pull the trigger, and I will see you on the inside.
Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. Nobody changes until they change their energy. The moment you start feeling whole in gratitude, your healing begins.
We are actually born to be great, to feel great. If you learn to control the breath, the life force itself. I am showing this all through science, through this simple breathing technique. 30 breaths, fully in and letting go. You learn to be the alchemist of your own body and your own mind. You are born to be more than the normal standard, to be super, man.
Peace, love, enjoy, relax. That's what it's all about, and that's why we're here.
I am super excited to start with our brand new URL, and that is freedomplatform.tv. Go there right now, and I'll be sharing screenshots throughout this broadcast here. This is our brand new dedicated URL, dedicated website, where all of our censored content will be located now and into eternity. This is all the episodes with David Icke. These are our conversations with Dr. Rashid Buttar, both of them. Both of our conversations with Dr. Judy Mikovits, our conversations with Dr. Kaufman, with Robert Kennedy, everything that was banned on other channels and major The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Miles, Professor of Financial Economics at the Imperial College in London and former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. Previously, you were chief UK economist for both Morgan Stanley Bank and Merrill Lynch, and board member and non-executive director for the Financial Services Authority. You were also a member of the Council of Economic Advisors to Her Majesty's Treasury and were awarded a CBE for your services to monetary policy. Recently, you warned the government to be wary of another extremely costly lockdown and highlighted that, quote, the benefits may not exceed the costs, and that the 3-month lockdown earlier this year came at, quote, an extremely high price relative to the health benefits. David, welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. You know, one of the big questions I guess I wanted to start off and just ask you about is, you know, we keep hearing about this SAGE group of, you know, advisors to the Prime Minister, and they're all these scientific advisors. And I sat back today and thought, why isn't there an economist like you on that committee to advise on the ramifications of the economy, which is so massive? So just curious for your thoughts right away to that question.
Well, you're right that there aren't economists. I think they are largely epidemiologists who have, you know, enormous experience of pandemics and how they evolve and spread out over time. And there's some very eminent people on it. But as you rightly say, no economists. And their focus, I think, is very much on the infection, how it's spreading, what you can do to try and reduce the infection rate and minimize deaths directly from COVID. And in some ways, that's a natural thing, that you want the scientists to give you their best view on the spread of the infection. But I think when it comes to actually making policy decisions, you would absolutely want the government also to have analysis of and advice on what are, if you like, the side effects of policies that might be very effective in reducing the spread of the virus and perhaps minimizing likely future deaths. What are the side effects of that? Some of which are health side effects, some of which are economic side effects, which in turn will have health impacts down the road. And I suppose in an ideal world, SAGE would do its analysis, and there would be, if you like, a sort of corresponding body that would be assessing the wider and longer term economic and health side effects of policies designed to control the infection. I think to some extent that is happening, but it's not happening in as formal a way as the SAGE procedure. And I think it's perhaps generating something of an imbalance in the kind of information that's feeding into government decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I think at first when people were trying to quantify the lockdown, you know, in monetary terms, people thought, okay, that's very callous. We need to think about saving lives. But as this extends longer and longer, you know, people keep talking about how the lockdown is going to affect our mental health, about how it's going to affect the economy long term. I think Lord Rose, a former chairman of Marks and Spencer, recently came out and said, for every day we're locked down, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to recover. And I think it's important to have these conversations, but it's hard to quantify it and get people to really understand the costs of a lockdown, isn't it?
I think it is very challenging to quantify. But I think the one thing we do know is that very restrictive policies kept in place for many, many weeks, months, indeed on end, are likely to have very substantial knock-on effects, negative knock-on effects on the wider economy, and also on mental health and other health issues as well. So whilst it's absolutely difficult to quantify these things, and there's always an element of counterfactual, well, what would people have done if the government didn't impose the restrictions? Wouldn't they have self-imposed restrictions anyway? So there's very difficult issues about counterfactuals, what would have happened if. But I think to not put the effort into trying understanding those knock-on effects would itself likely lead to misguided policies.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd love to talk about some of the points you just mentioned, you know, shortly. Today we go into what they're calling down lockdown 2.0, full tier 4 lockdown for the entire country or the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of people watching from around the world. Is this the best decision from an economic perspective, in your opinion? And what are some of the costs that this will lead to?
Well, I think relative to the first lockdown, which came in the UK, you know, starting toward the end of March and ended up actually lasting almost 3 months, if it does turn out to be 1 month, then pretty obviously the economic damage and costs that that will do, and indeed the sort of knock-on mental health costs, would be proportionately lower than the 3-month lockdown. So at least there's the prospect that it may last significantly less than the lockdown that started toward the end of March. Whether or not this one is justified, I think is a tricky judgment. Clearly, we're in a very difficult position in the UK right now. There are no easy ways forward. The infection has increased a lot. And I'm sure Sage is right that there is a risk, a significant risk, of hospitals being overwhelmed in some parts of the country. Whether or not a national lockdown, one thing we do know is that the infection is running at different rates in different parts of the UK. Whether a sort of national lockdown is the optimal strategy is somewhat less obvious. But at least if it were in place for 4 weeks, and that does bring down the infection rate rapidly, and then we could start easing the restrictions and go back to something which is a bit more differentiated by region of the UK, that would be a less damaging way forward than what we had that ran through March, April, and most of May and into June.
Right. No, I understand it would be less. I'm trying to also try to quantify what this will actually mean, because we keep, we know that, for example, the hospitality sector was kind of barely hanging on. We know that certain businesses were just starting to make a comeback, but now a lot of them have said this extra month is going to put them out of business. Now, it's one thing to hear the anecdotal stories of people losing their businesses, but it's great to have an economist like you to talk and to say, well, how is that going to actually quantify into lives lost, changes in mental health over the coming years? Is there any way to explain what that is to people?
Well, there's a lot of evidence that if restrictions that we're about to see in the UK were to cost substantial numbers of jobs, because some firms, as you say, are on the brink already, and another 4 or 5 weeks might mean that they just don't reopen, and therefore you lose jobs, not just for a month or two, but maybe permanently. We do know that the cost of a big reduction in employment, which is likely to last for a substantial period, is very large. So one of my colleagues at Imperial College, very eminent public health economist called Carol Proper, she recently produced some analysis, I think it's very careful analysis, which would suggest that if you go back to the financial crisis and the scale of job losses in the UK back then, in the aftermath of September, October 2008, the job losses that we saw in the UK back then, she estimates, increased the number of people with chronic health conditions by something like 900,000. And they become chronic health conditions with obviously an enormous health and welfare costs stretching far into the future. And that those were employment losses on the scale that we saw in 2008, 2009. Right now, employment in the UK is probably down since the pandemic started by at least as much as that. So it's very clear that if you have employment costs that are large, the long-term damage that does to the welfare of people in the country is absolutely enormous. That bit, I think, is very clear. I think what's a little bit more difficult to work out right now, given that the infection rates have moved up a lot in a short period, and there is no doubt a risk of hospitals being overwhelmed in some parts of the country, whether a strategy short of a lockdown would end up generating such panic in the short run that you'd end up with something as bad as a 4-week lockdown anyway. So I guess where I come down on all this is that if what we see right now in the UK is really a short, sharp lockdown that succeeds in bringing the infection rate down quickly, and we can ease restrictions back in much of the country within 3 or 4 weeks, that may well be a sensible strategy. On the other hand, if this is a lockdown where we think we need to keep this in place more or less indefinitely until a vaccine comes along, I think it's likely to be a very, very damaging strategy, and one which would not pass any sensible cost-benefit analysis. So the question is, what is it we're about to embark on in the UK? Is it really the short, sharp 3 or 4 weeks, Or is it a more open-ended thing that we end up needing to keep in place, or at least the government thinks we need to keep in place for much longer? And I think it's very unlikely that that second sort of lockdown would pass any kind of sensible cost-benefit analysis.
Right, and that we kind of get into this quality adjusted life year analysis, which I'd love to talk about if it does extend, because then we can really quantify what maybe a loss of life might be versus the economy. You said something interesting there, that if we see the unemployment the same as, say, financial crisis, potentially up to 1 million people with these chronic, health issues that they'll have to pay for through the NHS, and that's not even talking about COVID-related health issues. I mean, that's a tremendous strain on the economy. Right now, I think you said recently that I think potentially 25% of the workforce might be on furlough, so we don't really know the unemployment numbers until that kind of ends. I mean, that looks like a lot of unemployed people, doesn't it?
I think that's right. I think right now the what you might call the hidden unemployment right now in the UK is very substantial. One might hope that a lot of those people who are either on furlough or have been laid off, do get jobs back. But the history of the labour market, not just in this country, but in many countries, is that once people do become unemployed, it can be quite a long route back into the world of employment. So I have no doubt that we will live with the economic after effects of job losses for a very long time yet. As I say, though, I don't think that in itself proves that the government strategy right now is necessarily the wrong one. To my mind, what it does show is that an extended lockdown is unlikely to pass a cost-benefit analysis. The short, sharp lockdown is perhaps a bit different, but we're not quite sure what it is we're going into here.
Okay. Shall we talk about this quality adjusted life year? And I think you've described some of this as macabre to a certain extent, but it's worth having the conversation of, I know it's hard to talk about this, but what is a life worth? And then I know I've seen some of your analysis that if you save a life, how many years of life does that give the person back? Is it an average of 10 years, et cetera? Because like you said, if this goes into 60 days, 90 days, we might have to have these honest questions and say, okay, if we're saving 20,000 lives, is that worth, 50 billion cost to the economy? Can you talk people through how you go through that logic and how you try to get over the emotional side of that argument?
Well, you're right. It's a slightly macabre topic, and it's one which, although governments have to make decisions on these kind of trade-offs every day, they prefer in some sense not to focus on in public. I say that governments have to make these decisions all the time. Obviously, when you decide that the speed limit on your motorway system is going to be 70 miles an hour rather than 90 or 50, you are essentially trading off the likelihood of more lives lost if people can drive at 90 miles an hour than you're trading that off against the benefits that people get to where they want to go quicker. And we don't have a speed limit on the roads in the UK of 10 miles an hour. If we did, there'd be far fewer fatalities. But of course, the cost of people not being able to go more than 10 miles an hour would be immense. So we don't do that. And in fact, the Department of Transport in the UK has effectively got a rule about how costly it is to lose a life in a car crash. And they trade that off against the benefits of people being able to go a little bit faster. Something happens in the National Health Service year in the UK, which is even more explicit than that. And this is where I think one can make a calculation about the value of a saved extra year of life. And the National Health Service rule goes like this. It says, if there is a treatment that you could introduce in hospitals in the UK in our National Health Service, which would save on average 1 extra year of life if you apply the treatment, then as long as that treatment costs less than £30,000, one should apply the treatment. But if it costs more than £30,000, it doesn't pass what you might call the sort of resource allocation rule. And I think you have to have a rule like that. Otherwise, you end up saying, well, anything that looks like it might increase one's chances of living a bit longer, however expensive it is, we should do it. And you would end up having a tax rate of 98% in the UK, and nearly the whole of GDP would be spent on the health service. And of course, that would be crazy. Nobody would want that. No government could get elected if it did that. And this £30,000 per treatment that might save you an extra year of life is the rule that guides resource allocation in the National Health Service. And in a piece of analysis that I did a little while ago, I tried to apply that rule to see whether the lockdown that we had in the UK starting in March, eventually lasting about 3 months, passed that kind of test, given different possible scenarios about how many lives were saved as a result of a 3-month lockdown.
Right.
And, to summarize just the results very briefly, what that suggested was that keeping the lockdown in place for as long as 3 months may have generated costs that were very high relative to the likely benefits. And therefore, a 3-month lockdown in the UK looks extremely expensive given the costs and the benefits of having it in place.
And if I was maybe just to generalize some of the assumptions you made about that model, I think you said if you save a life, roughly 10 years of life you might save for that person, times the 30,000, I guess that's 300,000 pounds you would potentially save with each life. Is that a rough idea?
Yes, in a way that's right. So, I mean, if you looked at the average age of people who, tragically have died with COVID, it's somewhere in the sort of low 80s. If you asked what was the life expectancy of people of that typical age, at best, probably it was about 10 years, probably actually a little bit less, given that most of the people who died of that age with COVID had related health problems. So if you then said, well, okay, suppose you apply that National Health Service rule, how many resources using the NHS rule would you want to apply to saving, on average, those kind of lives? And the answer would be, as you say, £300,000 or £400,000. Now, I stress again, this looks like a very macabre thing to do. It looks like the kind of thing a kind of heartless economist would do, attaching money values to lives saved. But the reality is that that's how decisions are made in public health systems in pretty much every country in the world, and in other areas where governments have to make rules. How fast can people drive on our roads, for example? So it was simply applying that kind of rule. And I think had that analysis said, well, it was a close run thing whether the lockdown for 3 months was sensible or not, I think I'd have been much more open-minded about it. But I think as it turned out, the numbers suggested that the costs were so much higher than the £30,000 per QALY rule would have justified, that it seemed to me you'd have to go way beyond that National Health Service rule to have justified restrictions, blanket restrictions kept in place for as long as we did back in the spring and into the summer here in the UK.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the maximum deaths was back in April, I think it was 1,200 or 1,242 in one day. So if you took that number of 300,000, which is probably being generous with 10 years of life, and you do the math compared to the GDP loss per day, which I heard now is about 1.8 billion in GDP loss per day on lockdown. Maybe I'm off, but it looks to be orders of magnitude cost-benefit analysis. And I know this is kind of a macabre topic, but like you said, we make these decisions every day in our policy and, like you said, the speed limits, the NHS. So it's something we have to face at some point, like you said, in an extended lockdown and say, this actually just doesn't make sense. And if we continue this, we'll quite literally just bankrupt the nation.
Well, I think continuing to have blanket lockdowns switched on for a few months, then maybe off for a month or so, then switch them back on, is so costly that my guess is that that would not pass any sensible cost-benefit analysis. Again, to stress, that's not the current government strategy. We're told that this is going to be a 4-week lockdown. Hopefully it will succeed in bringing the infection rates down very rapidly, take off the table much of the risk of hospitals being overwhelmed, And that might well be a sensible strategy. I think what wouldn't be, though, is if we kept getting back into this situation, 2 months on, 1 month off, 2 months on, 1 month off. I think that would be pretty disastrous.
Okay. And again, we were just talking about kind of that NHS figure. We weren't talking about long-term economic damage or mental health or depression or all these other issues. We just were told that the furlough might be extended now to March. There's been a £150 billion stimulus package. One thing would be great to ask someone like you is, who pays for this? Because I think a lot of us are saying, oh, the government's paying for it. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but over time, that's usually passed on to taxation to usually low and middle class earners. Is that right, or am I looking at that wrong?
No. I think you're right. I think the costs of this will be paid some way down the road, probably in higher taxes, and somebody's going to pay the taxes. Of course, the lucky thing, if there is anything lucky about this pandemic, and it's hard to see anything positive about it, but at least it's come at a time when governments can borrow at extraordinarily low rates. It's truly amazing that the UK government, issuing bonds in the so-called index-linked bond market that you'll understand well, can borrow at a real cost, a real interest rate, for long periods, for 20, 30, 40 years, at substantially negative interest rates. So after you adjust for inflation, the UK government would pay you minus 2.5% every year if you bought a UK government bond for the next 10 or 20 odd years. Now, it's still the case, though, that the government is borrowing on such a scale that even with those very low interest rates, taxes are going to be higher at some point in the future. I think one might hope that when this thing is passed, that there's enough of an economic recovery and no big increase in interest rates, so the government can take its time in clawing back the extra tax revenue to generate the fiscal surpluses to pay off all the bonds it's issuing now. And I mean, historically, the UK government has managed to do that, at least on 3 occasions in the last couple of hundred years, after the First World War, after the Second World War, after the Napoleonic Wars. And after each of those wars, the stock of government debt in the UK was much higher than it's likely to be now. So, if you're being optimistic about the thing, you might say, well, look, we've been in this sort of situation and worse before. And over time, as long as you've got time as a government to sort of make good the damage, you may be able to do that without having to massively raise taxes in the near term. So I think the UK government is probably doing the right thing. After all those people who've been laid off and are not working at the moment do need some kind of support. And I think it is right, actually, to run a very large deficit right now and just hope that the financial markets then give you the time to gradually bring the debt back down over a period of many, many years rather than a few months.
Right. Professor, let me ask you a question. You made an interesting point, I think, on a talk you gave recently, where you said it's fairly recent phenomenon, maybe in the last 20 or 30 years, where citizens kind of expect the government to solve our problems. Whereas if you go back past 50 years, especially in this country, or maybe other countries, the population kind of understood there would be problems in the world and crises that they would kind of have to bear the brunt of, whether that was world wars, et cetera. And I think you also made a reference to the Hong Kong flu, which I think was 68, that cost 80,000 lives, which again is now more than we've seen with COVID. And yet there wasn't anywhere near this type of reaction, the government support, or even people looking to the government. It was more the tough British spirit. Maybe you can give me your perspective on that mindset shift and how that affects the economics.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a mind shift. I'm just about old enough to remember the 68, 69 Hong Kong flu, where, as you rightly say, I mean, a large number of people in the UK died. It was very serious. The government did not lock down the economy, and it did not massively increase spending. And I think part of the reason was not because they thought this wasn't very serious. It was perfectly plausible at the time to think that deaths might have been much greater than they actually were. It was a bit more that, as you put it yourself very nicely, and it was an environment where people didn't expect that when bad things happened, the government would sort them out. And I think we have changed over the last 50 years in this country, in many countries, where we expect and look to governments to immediately counter bad things that happen. And it may be, this is kind of amateur sociology rather than sort of scientific analysis, and certainly not economics. It may be that, you know, the generation of people of voting age back then in late 1960s had been through the Second World War. Many of them had been through the Depression before that. And there was an acceptance that life threw up things that were very difficult, and the government didn't always have answers to them. And you kind of got through things. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the government now should just say to people, oh, well, tough, you know, do the best you can. There's not much we can do about it. That wasn't my point in contrasting today with the Hong Kong flu. It was a different point, merely that now there is an immediate, almost instantaneous expectation and political pressure on government to be seen to be doing things very dramatic, very quickly. And governments have to react to that. And that wasn't true back then.
Yeah. When I studied economics at the Sloan School of Business many, many years ago, one of my professors said, there's no free lunch. And I'm sure you remember this phrase when you were in the city, no free lunch. And for people that don't know what that means is there's no free lunch. You never get anything for free. You're always going to pay for anything you get. And, you know, right now people are getting, you know, 80% of their wages in furlough, and they're thinking, okay, things are pretty good. But I'm curious if they really realized that their savings just went down to negative, maybe in real terms, or their mortgage on their property just doubled, or, you know, all these other costs in the future are actually going up massively because they are actually paying for their own subsidized salary, if they would accept it or if they would be behaving in the same way. I don't know. What do you think of that thought?
Well, it's a good question. And right now, I suspect most people, but let's put it this way, the people who've received, you know, continuing to get most of their income on furlough, I would imagine probably think it's a good deal in the sense that they've been hit extremely hard, and in a sense, quite rightly, the cost of that will then be spread out across the wider population. Many of whom are alive now, but some of whom aren't even alive because the extra taxes may come 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And I think there is an argument, actually, which is kind of like an insurance argument for people who, through no fault of their own, have taken a huge hit to their income, to get a kind of insurance policy from the rest of society. Whether or not people are aware of the scale of it and just how much higher taxes might be and when the bill will be picked up, I rather imagine that most people don't look too closely at the numbers, you know, haven't got the same interest perhaps as you and I in looking at, you know, what is the scale of government debt? What is the size of the deficit? If you shared that out amongst the population, how much would higher taxes be in the future? So it's a bit hard to know how many people would still support the policies the government was following if they were looking closely at the numbers. My guess, though, at the moment is that there would be fairly widespread support for it. And I think that's because at the moment, most people, I think, rightly recognize that those people who are unable to work and have lost their job, you know, are in a sense the very unlucky people through no fault of their own. Of course, things would change if one were allowed to more or less indefinitely stay on a furlough. And the incentive then for some people might be, well, I don't really feel that keen to go and look for another job. And I think that's why the government is very keen that these very expensive support measures, people on furlough, are seen to be very much time limited and restricted to periods where it's the government itself has, in a sense, forced people not to be able to work, rather than something we're just going to roll forward and extend forward, right through much of next year and beyond. I think the Chancellor, is rightly very reluctant to be seen to be willing to let furlough schemes just run and run and run.
Right. Is this second lockdown going to cause what they're calling a double dip recession? What do you think the GDP will drop to in the Q4? And even if, say, for example, we're only locked down this time for 60 days, what will be the economic ramifications? As in, how long will it take us to recover, in your mind?
Yeah. It seems quite plausible now as we go into November that GDP will almost certainly, I think, have fallen back a bit in November, possibly a bit in December relative to where we were in the previous months. Therefore, GDP will be a bit lower. So it completely knocks on the head any prospect of this V-shaped recovery that we kind of bounce back by the end of this year. I think it will likely mean that GDP for the whole of this year in the UK 2020 might be, at least 10% lower than it was in 2019, and maybe that's more like 11, 12% or so, which would be a huge hit, of course. At the beginning of this year, probably most economists were predicting, well, in 2020, GDP might grow by 1.5%, 2%. If it actually goes down by 11 or 12%, then it's kind of 14% or so below where you might have expected. That is an absolutely enormous hit to the economy. I think one of the big unknowns here, and it's interesting that you asked, what might happen if we had a 60-day lockdown? If it ran up, right to Christmas, What we don't know right now is how many firms are actually hovering right on the brink of, we're so underwater now that we're just never going to reopen. And my worry, I think many of us worry about this, I'm sure you do as well, is that there may be a lot of companies who maybe they could live with 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but if it becomes 2 months and they can't open this side of Christmas, they may just feel we can't carry on. We're just stopping, and they don't reopen then when restrictions are lifted. And the hit to employment becomes not just a temporary thing, but the jobs have gone, and we take years to get them back. That's a real worry. What I think, if I may, what I think is extraordinary, given all that gloomy assessment, and I think it's right to be a bit gloomy about the situation at the moment, just how stock markets in many countries just are, they're back where they were at the beginning of the year, in many countries a bit higher. That's, maybe I'm too pessimistic, but I look at that and think, wow, can that be right? But that's where we are.
Yeah, quickly, well, what do you make of that quickly? Because I expected those to fall 30, 40%. And again, in the very beginning, they did, if you remember. I think they were down 30%. Now, some people say, those indexes are based on, FTSE 100s and S&P 500s, and those are these big global winners like the Amazons and the Apples and the tech companies, which are doing well. But that argument doesn't seem to answer the whole question, does it?
No, I don't think it does that. And also, in those big indices, there are some airlines and there's some car companies and there's a whole, there's hotel chains and there's a whole bunch of other companies that you really would expect to get a big hit here. I find it genuinely puzzling. As you rightly say, back in, I guess, the end of March, when people began to realize just how serious this was, the stock market's down like 30%. And it's not so obvious we've had great news between then and now. Here we are in the UK going back into lockdown. Maybe there's a vaccine coming. It's not quite clear. Nobody's going to really think that you can roll that out and get most of the UK population inoculated by January or February, that, at best, that's going to be the middle of the year, maybe toward the end of the year. This thing really looks like it's lasting a lot longer than people thought back in March. And yet stock prices have bounced back quite a long way. On my gloomy days, I think the market's just hugely overvalued. And then sort of other times I wake up and have a cup of coffee, feel a bit more cheerful and say, well, maybe just, the stock market's being quite rational. Its time horizon is 40, 50 years. This all seems grim now, but we get through it. By the summer of next year, it kind of is history, maybe. And so, in a world in which real interest rates on government bonds have fallen even further, maybe that fall in real interest rates at least compensates for the COVID damage, and it kind of washes out, and that's why stock prices are not much different from where they were at the beginning of the year. I still don't quite believe all that. Yeah. And I still got a sense that these markets have got, much more downside than they've got upside from where we are right now.
Yeah, so do I, but not buying put options right now, and I won't for a while. You mentioned the uncertainty. It's the bane of the existence of the entrepreneur is the uncertainty, and I think that's what's been most frustrating. And I've had a lot of entrepreneurs on this show recently, a lot of them in the hospitality industry and in other industries, and them just not knowing is the worst thing. And also, not knowing what the government's going to do is also very difficult. So I don't know what they're going to do next week, so I can't plan my employment out. I can't plan my limited capital investment even over the next few months. And then really, so if they're not confident something will happen, they're more likely to cut their losses, like you said, throw in the towel. And then you're talking about really more medium and long-term job losses and real hurt to the economy. And that is a big concern. And that's what I think has been quite stressful for the UK, just not knowing what's going to come, not having necessarily a consistent, a consistent reasoning strategy behind some of the decisions. And I feel like that's hurt us. I don't know what you think.
I think you're right. Uncertainty must be very high right now. It's a wonder any companies are doing much investment at the moment. Investment clearly has fallen a great deal. And it's not going to bounce back anytime real soon. Unless we get a breakthrough, unless, there really clearly is a vaccine that's going to be rolled out, within the first few months of next year. So that could be an absolute game changer. But in the absence of that, I think the uncertainty is so great that we should get used to very low investment for some time to come. I think past that uncertainty, as you rightly put it, is not quite knowing what the government strategy really is. Is it, well, right now, for example, is it we just must bring the infection rate down quite quickly in the short term to stop the hospitals being overwhelmed. And once we've got it down, even though we haven't completely suppressed the virus, and there are still people catching it, we've got it down enough to start lifting the restrictions because the short-term danger of hospitals being overwhelmed has gone away. And if you take that view, and I think that's what the government is saying it's doing, then you might think, well, hopefully this will be a very short lockdown. But if the strategy is more, well, we must keep the infection rate very low and COVID deaths as low as we can indefinitely until we get a vaccine, that's a different story. That's, well, we could be having lockdowns, as we were saying earlier, on and off, rolling for the next 6-12 months or more. And if you think that's what the government's doing, why would you want to invest? There's a certain lack of clarity in a government strategy, which I think adds to the uncertainty. It's inevitable there's going to be uncertainty because there's scientific things you don't know about. Are we going to get quick, reliable tests? Are we going to get a vaccine? But I think it's exacerbated by what seems to be a lack of complete clarity about what exactly is the strategy of the government.
Yeah. I've been talking lately about this concept of control versus elimination, and it seems like some of our policy decisions is based on, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but almost selling to the public this vision of eliminating the virus, and that's what our policy is based on, when in fact control seems to be the only viable long-term and economically viable decision. And so it's kind of getting our heads around that as well. One other question I wanted to ask you, and again, it's a little on the macabre side, but I've got to ask, you know, every day we open the papers and it's case numbers, it's hospitalizations, and it's deaths. And we see those three numbers, and they're used massively to affect policy, especially the cases number. But the deaths, we don't go much behind just a number. And I'm ever wondering if you should quantify the value of the death. And this is something that was talked about kind of early on in this piece. You know, whether, like you said, it's an 85-year-old person that died with 2 years of life expected, or whether it's a 7-year-old boy or girl that's died with an 80 years of life expected. And again, everything that comes with that. Part of me wishes there was, you know, some economic figures right next to those numbers so we could have a little bit more of a sense. Do you think we should do something like that?
I think most people recognize that there's an enormous difference between the death of a 10-year-old kid who is healthy and of an 83-year-old person who had, you know, multiple health issues. And I think most people would then feel that that meant that the government strategy that should be followed and the restrictions they were willing to put up with themselves will be very different depending on what kind of people are losing their lives here. And I think it does, once you accept that point, I think we all accept that. The vast majority of people would agree with that, particularly older people who I think are actually quite vociferous in saying, you know, don't make this other group that are rather low risk and tend to be young and healthy, don't make them suffer for me. I think a lot of old people do think that. And I think because of all that, it does make some sense to do what you say, which is to, you know, monitor, as well as tragically how many people are dying with the virus, what kind of people they are, because it will help inform individual judgments about what they want the government to do about this. So I think you're right there.
I think we should, just start talking about that a little bit more, or be willing to have those conversations, as opposed to sweep them under the rug. You know, I've got an aunt in Colorado, and it's interesting what she says. Part of her, you know, early on, she said, yeah, I should probably lock down for my health. And then as it went on, she said, I've only got a couple of years left. I want to see my grandkids, you know? She was almost like, I want to make that decision as opposed to maybe someone else making that decision for me. You know, that's a whole nother question. Professor, just final thoughts from you, or anything we didn't cover that maybe you could help people just get a perspective of the economics of everything happening here, because I don't think it's talked about enough, and yet it's all part of our lives, and our lives will play out in an economic sense over the next 10 years based on decisions we make now.
Absolutely. I thought, finally, I'd say something. The one thing that does make me optimistic, and I felt this for a while now, and there was a couple of American economists who wrote a very insightful piece very, very early on this pandemic. One of them was a very famous economist called Romer, and he said very early on in the pandemic, if you could get quick tests, even if they were not particularly reliable, even if they had quite big risks of, you know, false positives and false negatives, and you could roll them out, and people could be tested maybe, you know, once every couple of days, and it would take 10 or 15 minutes to get a result, that really would dramatically change the path that the infection could take. And I do think that we are much nearer that position now than we have been. And it was interesting to hear you know, Boris Johnson hold this out as a hope when he announced the lockdown just over the weekend. And I do think that, you know, if there were tests that people could routinely take, you know, once or twice a week, maybe even every day, where you just spit into something, look at it, you get the result in 10 minutes, even if they have quite high error rates, they would potentially bring the rate of infection down very, very quickly, and could even make the thing die out. So I'm of the view that that's the more likely optimistic way forward than getting a vaccine and rolling that out, which could take 9, 12 months to actually roll it out right across the country. But the quick test thing, which who knows, could be available this side of Christmas, I think is an absolute game changer if that were to happen.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You brought that up. And so just to conclude what we've been talking about today, the first lockdown earlier this year, because it went on so long, it seemed like it probably maybe wasn't the best decision economically. I mean, I think we can kind of see that in hindsight. Now, at the time, we didn't have all this information, but now we do. And so based on now, you're saying if this goes on any more than 30 days, we really have to take a step back and say, this is going to maybe really damage us much more than it's saving us. Maybe even a factor of 10, to where we've got to really sit down and have an honest conversation about the economic viability of a country versus these lives lost. Is that fair?
I think it's absolutely fair that what you might call a short, sharp lockdown may well be a sensible strategy. But if it becomes a prolonged lockdown where the message remains, don't leave your house, I think the costs are highly likely to be bigger than any benefits if that's the strategy that ends up being followed.
Right. And some of these costs are so hard to quantify. Like I said, the mental health, the physical health, the long-term, the depression, the long-term economic damage. It's hard to even factor all of those in there. But even not factoring all of them, more than 30 days, this starts to look a questionable call, I think. So, look, I really appreciate your time, Professor. Thank you so much. I really do think we need economists on this SAGE committee because it's all part of one piece. And if we don't look at it holistically, then we're going to ask ourselves serious questions years to come. When we're going to do a forensic analysis on 2020, I'm sure this is going to be the topic of much analysis over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And we'll look back and probably ask ourselves, what were we thinking making these somewhat emotional decisions when scientifically or economically they were quite wrong. So appreciate your thoughts, and thank you for having some of the macabre conversations that not many people want to have, but they're important to have. So I appreciate you, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking to you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. That's Professor David Miles, and thank you for tuning in. Please leave your comments below, share this with someone who might need it, and we'll see you next time on London Real. Thank you. At London Real, we believe that individual transformation can change the world. Join us and start your journey today.